Good afternoon, and welcome to the ELECTS webinar, Improving Morale, It Can Be Done Without Frosting. I'm Eva Sorrell, a member of the ELECTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Su Epstein, Director at the Saxon B. Little Free Library in rural Columbia, Connecticut. Sue holds a doctorate in sociology from the University of Connecticut and began her career teaching criminology. Leaving academia, she earned her MLS from Simmons College and subsequently worked in a variety of libraries, including the newspaper, Springfield Union News, and Greens Farms Academy. Her presentation will discuss why workplaces develop low morale, how to recognize the problem, and how to start the process of improving morale. Just a few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed. If you have questions for Sue, please type them into the question box on your screen, and she will answer them as time permits at the end of her presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we are on the air will be answered offline and the answers sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. Please take time to fill out the evaluation form since it will be used by the committee to plan future events. There may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Sue.
Hi, my name is Su Epstein, and I'd like to thank you all for being here today as we talk about workplace morale and ways to improve the situation. I'm going to talk at you for a bit. We have a few polls thrown in, and then I plan that we'll have some time, as Eva mentioned, at the end of the session to answer questions. I never set off to become an expert on the subject of workplace morale. I've come to this in many ways really due to bad luck. Just as some people are lucky in love, some people are lucky in work. They get job offers easily, they love their jobs, their employees treat them well, and it's a happy relationship. Frequently, I have not been that lucky. More times than not, I've entered jobs where the staff has been disgruntled or outright angry. They have resented our employer, and they have been so unhappy that they have passively refused to work or actively undermined the institution. I've had directors that daily sent most of the staff home in tears. So more times than not, I have found myself in an environment with low morale, and as a supervisor, with the expectation that I was hired to improve morale. In truth, I started having no clue what to do at all. And often I simply set off just to do my job as best I could. But at a certain point, I realized that I was very successful at improving morale, and initially this was pretty puzzling to me since I had not actively set about to make change, yet it had occurred. When I realized I made change not once or twice, but several times, I started to pay attention. And I've talked with many, analyzed, assessed, spent much time thinking about what worked and why. And by thinking about the leaders who created poor environments, I've also learned what not to do. And by analyzing successful situations, I've kind of deconstructed what did work. What follows comes directly from my personal experience as an employee with low morale, as the supervisor charged with changing the situation, and as a director who wishes to perpetuate a strong and comfortable workplace. Now, at this point, before going on, I'd like to do a quick poll, so I'll ask my wonderful tech support to put this up for you and ask, are you currently in a job that you feel has low morale? Wow, we've got lots of yeses at the moment. We're about halfway voted at this point. About 67% of you have voted. I guess, nope, we're up to 70. Maybe at this point, I don't know if the updates still change, we can show the results at this point, if it will keep showing what the results are. Okay, at this point, it looks like about 78% have voted, and about 48% say yes, and 52% say unsure. But a striking 0% say no. That's kind of interesting results to me at this point. So moving, I guess, back to the slides at this point. Most of you or certainly a majority of you, I think, feel are in a situation either with low morale or suspect that you are. And I suspect that you have a sense of just how to know you have a morale problem. Still, there are a couple of things that I would like to share and point out. One of the first is the myth of the bad employee. An individual with a bad attitude is a problem, but it's not the same as an institution with a morale issue. Contrary to some popular beliefs, usually one bad apple does not spoil the whole bunch. If the institution is healthy, has a reasonable morale, but a problem with a person, generally the individual changes or leaves. So while it's true that one individual can affect a department or an institution, they do not usually affect others on a grand scale, and typically not in the long term unless there is some deeper underlying issue. Now, that being said, if there is one vocal person and they do not change or leave, it is likely that the problem is in fact greater than that one person. Sort of remember when you're in school and teachers told you that if you had a question you should ask because odds were very good that there were others who had the same question too? This kind of principle applies to many things in life. If one person is brave enough to say something, there are likely others who are thinking it. So if there is one individual who is displaying the signs of poor morale, and that individual is having a strong effect on others, then the issue is not an individual who is depressed or a poor employee, but usually a sign of morale problem that is simmering within the institution. Now, at this point, I'd like to do another quick poll. If we can get that up there for you. And that is similar to the last. Would you say you have experienced a work situation with low morale? Always, often, occasionally? I think based on our first poll reaction, I probably can guess the answer to this one. We're about half, 3/4 voted. Okay, we're a little over 80% voted, so maybe we can switch over at this point and show the results. So a vast majority have said you would either say you have experienced a work situation with low morale. I wish I could say I was surprised by that, but unfortunately I don't think I am.
Hi, everybody. We've lost Sue's audio, so just be patient with us for a moment as we try to get her back online.
Okay, can we hear me now? Okay, I'm told that we can hear her. Okay, good. Then we'll keep going, and I have no idea what happened. But we're talking about signs that are very clear if you have a morale problem, a vibe that permeates a building, it radiates off staff and patrons, and if one is paying attention, you can clearly identify what those signs are. Oh, okay. First, an overall decrease in productivity. Just the work doesn't get done. Lots of turnover in staff. People out sick. Frequent or blatant inappropriate comments or behaviors. Changes in customer service, usually shifting to poor service, particularly with problem patrons. Changes in people's dress, shifting to more unprofessional appearance. Changes in patron attitudes, such as more items left around, trash not thrown out, messier restrooms. All of these are clear signs that can be recognized as a morale problem. You feel it, you see the signs, you know it in your stomach. But what to do? The first place to start is defining the root of the problem. Search morale in Google and you get over 2 million pages offering you advice. But the bottom line really is this. Low morale in the workplace comes because workers see and experience real problems that go unheeded and unfixed. Address the problems and morale improves. I'm going to say this again because I cannot stress it enough. Low morale in the workplace comes because workers see and experience very real problems that go unfixed and unheeded. When you can address those problems, morale improves. Now, of course, this is easier said than done. Most often, the situation is complicated by circumstance. If the root of the problems are on an administrative level, it's much harder for supervisors or staff to resolve the issue. Some problems stem from real-world constraints, such as lack of funding, unsuccessful governing bodies, or physical facilities, things which administration and staff may have no control over. But sometimes the problems have simply snowballed because they weren't ever addressed, or have arisen because of some new circumstance, a change in organizational structure, location, or mission. Regardless of the circumstance, the situation does not need to be hopeless. If change is wanted, it's a matter of defining the real problem, or figuring out what the real problem is. Now, the first step in defining this issue is to listen. Listening means not only noting the gripes and complaints, but also being open to hearing what people are really saying, including yourself. So, for example, in one situation I was in, I had coworkers that constantly complained that the lunchroom was horrible. Susie ate disgusting food that smelled funny. Jimmy always left his food in the microwave unattended. Jane always left crumbs on the table behind her so you couldn't eat in the lunchroom. I also found myself agreeing. I hated the lunchroom. It was uncomfortable. When I started to truly listen to everyone, including myself, I realized that the problem was not necessarily with Susie, Jimmy, or Jane, but in general, break room etiquette was not being followed. And even though the rules were posted and clear, the break room was dirty and unusable by others. This was the real problem. Another step is listening beyond the surface. Listening beyond the surface is hard. It's very easy to get caught up in the complaint cycle. It's also very easy to see the surface issue. but it's worth the effort to listen for deeper meanings. And as you try to listen beyond the surface and are trying to discern what really the real issue is and what it's important that you first don't internalize or personalize. Try to conceptualize the situation as a task or a problem to solve, not a person to change. It would have been very easy in the break room example to blame Susie, James, Jane, but they were not the true problem. The point is not to make a laundry list of things against someone or the institution, but to objectively identify the more general nature or area of the problem. So as one is trying to discern the real problem, it's also important to acknowledge fear, that fear is real and legitimate. In situations where there is poor morale, there is often fear. This fear can take hundreds of forms. It may be fear of change, fear of being seen as incapable, fear of being recognized as being able to do more, fear of having to do more, fear of getting hurt, or most often, fear of losing one's job. The specific fear is not as important to recognize as its real and legitimate existence. So listening can mean acknowledging fears, and in turn, acknowledging the fear may help alleviate it or may illustrate how to avoid certain risks. This can be as simple as when listening to concerns, noting to yourself, your coworkers, your friends, or your family that you are, in fact, in a fearful situation. For staff in particular, fear may be justified. For example, one institution I was in, staff were daily being reminded that they were at-will employees. Whenever the director noticed something she didn't like or understand, the employee was reminded that they could be fired at any time. As a result, morale was low because employees were continually afraid of being let go. This fear was very real and justified. As a supervisor in this setting, I saw this fear in my staff, and I felt this fear directly. Simply acknowledging it helped by my saying, yep, this is a real legitimate fear in this situation. It didn't change the realities of the situation, but it helped everyone realize that we were not alone, and moreover that we were not crazy, and the fear reaction was not inappropriate. By acknowledging it, we were able to work around it and work together instead of being controlled by it. If an institution has suffered from poor morale for a substantial amount of time, as a supervisor in particular, employees just may not trust you. This may be particularly true if you are new to the situation. Staff may fear repercussions, may fear that the communicating their feelings or their concerns is pointless. If you are sincere about changing the environment, precautions should be implemented and made clear to alleviate such fears. You want to listen without repercussion or argument. You may feel yourself a fair person and truly be one, but your coworkers are responding to their own past experience. It's important that you do not internalize or make personal their concerns, do not respond defensively, because doing so will only serve to legitimize the fear for your staff. So this may mean that you must listen through more anonymous means, such as a survey or a suggestion box, rather than a direct interview or conversation. Now, the goal of listening and gathering information is to be looking for patterns. The thing to remember is that the act of listening is not, again, to perpetuate frustrations or fuel fires, but information gathering. The goal is to try to discern what is really upsetting people so that the real root of the problem can be addressed. You want to look for patterns, look for generalities and the specifics. In one institution I was in, upon my arrival with a clearly disgruntled staff, I met and asked each person, it was the tech services department, what was bothering them. As a whole, each staff person told me they thought the pace required of them was unreasonable. They said CERC staff was constantly upset, but when I listened more closely, one person noted that their frustration was that they had to check in and do preliminary processing of all material that arrived at one time. Nothing could be left pending. Another told me they wanted no responsibility for any item. They didn't want to be held accountable for anything's whereabouts. A third told me it was impossible to get the items processed into the system. Listening to this, a pattern emerged. Clearly, tech services was feeling pressured to have things in and out rapidly and not in their possession. But when I talked with CERC staff, they had no complaint about tech services. However, they did make comments like, they do the best they can. And when I started to listen for a pattern, there were other hints. Frustrations with new materials seemingly missing, but then would turn up. Frustrations that some staff checkouts for their own use was lackadaisical. By listening carefully, observing, and noting the pattern, a clear problem emerged that had not been named. Administration was taking materials before they were processed by tech services, and staff were being held accountable for things that they had no control over. If the materials were not put in the system immediately, it was a problem, in that no one knew who had the materials for sure, and the likely culprit could not be named. Another thing to think about, and is important to note, is to take all things seriously. As you're looking for patterns, the laundry list of concerns may seem trivial independently. While all locations have real and perceived issues, all institutions have real problems. The heat doesn't work, the budget's too slim, the hours too short, the list can be long. But often the biggest morale issues are not what an outsider would consider the real serious issues. Now this is both a pro and a con. On the positive side, it means that the issue can easily be resolved. However, on the negative side, it can mean frustration and aggravation that the issue that has sent people into this downward spiral is silly. Regardless of the situation or regardless of its status, all issues should be treated with the same concern and respect. Remember that it is likely that what is appearing as the stated silly issue may really just be a symptom of a larger, more substantive problem. For that tech services department, the seemingly silly issue, all materials needed to be checked in at one time, was really a symptom of a more serious problem. Books were being taken that were untrackable, and worse, being taken by an individual that one really couldn't call on. Now, the reason for listening and engaging in any process is to try to see the pattern for the general goal of making change. If you're seeking to make change as a staff member, it may be harder than if you are a supervisor or an administrator. And certainly, if you're in an institution with a bad administration, that is, one that is causing problems or doesn't wish to address problems, this is definitely a larger problem. As I talk about what can be done to make change, I'll try to address this from all levels. But at this point, I'd like to do one last quick poll, if we can, and if we can get that one up there. And that is to know how many of you are in a position that you would consider able to make change. Okay, we're about halfway at this point. We've got 60% of you have voted. And we're pretty much running right in the middle. Give it a few more minutes here, seconds. Okay, we're at about 70. Oh, we just jumped to 80% of have voted, so maybe we could show that poll at this point. Okay, well that's good. It looks like at least a fair amount of you feel that you are able to make change, though a handful of you still feel you are unable to make change. I will speak to both of those people in both of those positions. I do think it's important to note at this point that regardless of your position within an institution or the role that you play, there are things that you can do that can help the situation, that can make change. Certainly, some things are easier than others. Some things are bigger than others, but everyone can actually make change. The real question is whether the change will be enough. Now, as a foundation for improving morale, I cannot stress enough the role and importance of policy and procedure, or rules and process. It's easy to think of issues of policy and procedure as being limited to administrators or those making the rules, but in fact, all employees at all levels can make change in the area of rules and process. In fact, unless rules and process are followed on all levels, it is likely that the institution is going to have some kind of morale issue. Now, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, low morale centers on problems that can be easily resolved, but have escalated because of a lack of rules or process or a lack of enforcement of policy and procedure. This may be from an intentional lack or an accidental or a circumstantial lacking. Certainly, it's easier to remedy if it was accidental, but also this gets misinterpreted as, well, the rules are bad, the rules don't work, staff won't follow rules, and therefore the existing policy and process are just ignored. We pretend we see nothing, we say nothing, and pretend to hear nothing. Thus, the policy is blamed for the morale issues. While rules might be contributing in some cases, policy or procedure is not typically a real cause of low morale. Every institution has policies and processes and procedures of some kind, and every place must enforce them. But not every place has low morale. The problem is more often that the rules are not in place or are not enforced. Now, there are 4 basic tenets when dealing with rules and process and morale. First, the rules and process should be known. People's morale will go down when they don't feel things are in their control. Likewise, morale goes down when rules are not followed. So rules and processes provide a structure that make people feel secure and should be providing the structure so that work can be done. So it's important that the rules and processes exist and are communicated. Policy and procedures should exist for a reason and be appropriate. There should be a rationale and a reason behind rules and processes that can be explained. In other words, they need to make sense. Libraries say no food because food attracts vermin and damages the collection. Staff kitchens need to be cleaned for health and safety reasons, and because often staff have no place else to go. If the library needs to be open or needs to open at 10, people must arrive by that time for the library to function. The complication here is that many misinterpret this to mean a policy once made should blindly apply to all things without thought, and this simply does not work. The key is to be appropriate. For example, no earbuds is a rule that makes sense for librarians doing public service. They need to be able to hear the patrons, and they should not be looking preoccupied. The same argument can be made for those stacking in the shelves. Likewise, if you're stacking in the, or if you're shelving in the stacks, I should say, I reverse that, for safety reasons, you need to be able to hear the comings and goings of what's happening around you. However, people working in tech services may be in their own world, far from the public. Even in small libraries, this librarian may have their own den, sometimes in the bowels of the building, and the no earbud or by extension radio policy for these population does not have a reason, and in fact it can be detrimental, causing them to be bored or cut off from important concerns like weather reports. To enforce a no earbud policy for tech services can cause a morale problem. To say, since public services can't, you can't either, simply makes the rule nonsensical and questions all the credibility since the departments have different functions, needs, and circumstances. It's better to have a more specific policy that makes sense. No earbuds in public space of the library, regardless of who you are or what department you work in. And that relates to a third tenet. Rules need to apply to everyone. Because there should be no policy, procedure, or rule that does not have a reason, there should be no one that is exempt from the rules. This means patrons, volunteers, staff, supervisors, administrators, and board members. Nothing kills morale quicker than a situation in which the person in charge says others must do X, Y, and Z, but then blatantly ignores this him or herself. This was a huge problem in the issue of both the Tech Services Department when our administrator was taking out books that were unprocessed. Now, finally, policy and procedures are only valuable if enforced. In my experience, lack of enforcement is a huge cause of low morale. Policy exists, everyone knows the requirements, but some people disregard them. This becomes a slippery slope, and in the end, disorganization, anger, resentment, and low morale tend to result. Policy and procedures, if appropriate, exist for the productivity of the institution and the well-being of the people involved. This means when rules and processes are not followed by anyone, again, volunteers, patrons, staff, supervisors, administrators, board members, it's putting the institution and its members at risk. Policy violation needs to be addressed and there needs to be consequences. Now, dealing with policy and procedure is certainly easier as an administrator or a supervisor. On this level, you have a responsibility to evaluate policy and procedures for appropriateness and function. You also have the ability to take the steps to change policy and process, and it's certainly your responsibility to communicate the policy and enforce the policy. But as a staff member, ideally you have a situation in which you also can make suggestions or point out inappropriate process or policy. Though in reality, if you are in an institution with a morale issue, this is probably not possible. Still, you should follow the policy. This can improve the situation in a number of ways. It should help alleviate fear. It may resolve some annoying symptoms or larger issues, and it can be a catalyst for change. You also should not underestimate the power of setting an example and modeling behavior. In the learning process of almost all professions, students are told to watch the experienced person and model what they do. Children are socialized by having adults model behavior. Social psychology has illustrated people will follow each other's lead, and this occurs with many silly experiments. Stand outside and stare up, and you will get others to come and do the same thing. Humans are creatures that copy, and more than that, we are more comfortable when we are copying the behavior of the people around us. So one very simple thing that people can do to make change is to act in the manner that supports what they want changed. This not only changes behavior, but can change the way people think about what they're doing. There's a psychological term called cognitive dissonance. It basically means that people's actions and thoughts must be in support of each other. If they're not, one adjusts to be in support of the other. So if you force someone to engage in, say, violent behavior, even if they formerly were passive, eventually their thoughts will need to come into line with their actions and justify their actions. Clearly, this is an extreme kind of example, but this is the same principle that is applied for much of the self-help materials that say, want to feel happier? Smile. In today's context, follow the rules and the processes of the institution, and more people will also, and they will also start to feel better about the situation. So regardless of the level that you're in your institution, but this implies most strongly from the top down, if you're breaking the policy, then correct your own behavior. Morale cannot improve if the boss is breaking the rules. Now, at this point, I would like to say a quick word about ridiculous policies. Granted, some rules come to us from external sources and are, in fact, silly at best. They often can be true where policy is made, but the policy is made at a central office in a vastly different circumstance. Nothing helps this more than a very straightforward acknowledgement by all parties and an explanation if possible, saying, yes, this is a ridiculous rule for us, but it comes from the county office. Nope, doesn't apply to us at all, but we have to follow it anyway to keep the library open and funded. This stated recognition that we all know this is ridiculous and we can laugh at it usually helps and is something that can be shared and practiced at all levels. So, in practical terms, making change, begin by examining policy and procedure, making it functional if you can, following it regardless, and acknowledging when you have to follow it even though it makes no sense. Then, fix the things you can fix. Going back to where we started, listening and looking for patterns, there are likely things that can be done easily and immediately. Small problems that have been ignored as trivial can be fixed. This may be a review and revision of procedures, making sure the processes in place work for everyone. It's a very simple, easy, and productive initial step. Modeling behavior, following the existing rules. But there might also be little things that can be changed, a sign that can be posted for clarity, or an organizational system implemented, a closet cleaned, something that is relatively small but can have a large and rippling effect. In one of the libraries I was in, staff were greatly vexed because the voicemail message was out of date and done by a person no longer employed at the library. They felt it presented the wrong image, showed a lack of caring on the administration's part, and if the administration didn't care, they thought it was hopeless. In fact, the unupdated message was a low priority for administration. They were dealing with bigger issues. Figuring out how to change the message was not even on their radar. When a new staff person expressed the concern, they were told if they know how to change the message, then go for it. The staff person changed the message, and everyone was a bit happier. Now, did that change morale as a whole? No, of course not, but it was a step. Another step is to work together. Again, this forms bonds and unity, can help alleviate stress and fear. It can provide protection so that you not only feel less fear, but may lessen the realities or the causes of the fear, and it models behavior. People often do what they see others do around them. So if you're working together is one step. One step in working together is to cultivate the relationships with your coworkers. One person taking an action, even a small action, can lead to two. Two leads to three. Things start to grow. Also, by cultivating relationships with others, even if your situation does not change, your perspective on it can. Use humor, sympathy, moral support. When people know they're not alone, their approach to the situation can be more positive. We very often hear that two minds are better than one, and that the great thing about librarians is how much they share. Yet, in my experience, and especially in places with poor morale, people do not come together. The more people and the more levels that can work together, the better the morale for the institution. Now, working together is going to influence another important factor, and that is generating hope. Hope is a feeling of expectation and a desire for certain things to happen. The hope of change is another step in the right direction. Generating hope can be done in a number of ways. First, actions equal hope. Taking action is one of the strongest ways to improve a situation, demonstrating a concern, interest, and most of all, providing hope. Taking some kind of action, ever so small, can make a large difference. Again, this can be done as simply as addressing the things you can immediately, solve the easy problems, follow and enforce the policy, work together through brainstorming or a group commitment to solve some known problem. The more people who engage in the action to resolve a problem, the stronger the hope becomes. Solidarity also equals hope. When one person takes the action that they can and others follow, the shared connection and the unity between people provides hope and encouragement. So while there may be things that are larger than yourselves and are not easily changed, if a group of you engage in the behavior, people feel better. Depending on the situation, this can also help to alleviate fear and may help in reducing the risks that generate fear. So regardless of your position in the hierarchy of the institution, you are not alone. You work with people, you work for people. Whether you're a staff of 2 or 200, it's important to remember that you're all in the same boat. There can be strength in numbers, If one of the issues you have identified you personally can do and resolve, it may be that you can partner with another and the resolution becomes that much stronger. Also, acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is key. Remember I said taking all things seriously and acknowledging fear is important? So is acknowledging the situation. One of the most powerful things one can say to others in a situation where there is poor morale is, "You're right." The simple act of acknowledging a problem situation gives those involved credibility. It goes to the principle that recognizing there is a problem is the first step in solving it. Now, as a supervisor or administrator, it is equally as powerful to admit when you do not have an answer and when the situation cannot be altered because of external constraints. Saying, "Yes, this is a problem. We can't fix it because the rule is being handed down to us, but we can work together to find a way to deal with it." Such admissions place everyone working together. They acknowledge real limitations and can be the first step in building trust and working together. Now, specifically for administrators and supervisors, to improve morale, you must trust and support your staff. By the same token, staff must be trustworthy and earn trust. Micromanagement creates low morale in all settings. It is not an unreasonable expectation to presume everyone can do their job until or unless proven otherwise. If your staff proves to be untrustworthy, then you must train and educate. If this fails, you must document and remove. However, most staff is trustworthy and does their job well. If you find yourself thinking your staff is not, the first question to ask should be one of yourself. Why are you questioning the staff? What specifically have they done incorrectly? Are they actually doing things incorrectly or simply in ways different than you would? Again, this harkens back to policy and procedure. Policy and procedures should be in place to set the structure. Expectations should be clear and have substantiation. If the policy and procedures are fair and appropriate, it is only if policy and procedures are not followed that its attention is needed. And now, supporting staff is not merely the pat on the back or the occasional surprise cupcake. Not that things without frosting aren't good. We all love cupcakes, and we want frosting as well, but they're not really true support. Support means communicating. Let people know what's happening. If you can't or you don't know, let them know that too. There's nothing wrong in saying, "Some things are happening right now that I just can't discuss yet, but I will when I can." Just like acknowledging that the situation that can't be changed or a handed down rule must be followed, even though it makes no sense, the direct and truthful communication allows people solid footing. Support is also follow through. If you say you're going to do something, do it. And finally, although I know I must sound like a broken record, support is having the clear policy and enforcing it. Most people are uncomfortable floundering around and not knowing the expectation or confused because it appears that the expectations are constantly shifting. No one wants to feel that a rule applies to them but not to others. Consistency must be enforced, and if the person in charge is not enforcing the policy, no one else will. Now, out of this comes trust and respect, core elements to a successful workplace. With these elements in place, the work environment becomes one of shared goals and opportunities. Thus, even those factors that do discourage but cannot be changed can become more bearable. As another example, I once had a director who was sure all her employees were problematic. At hire, she told me to watch my staff and control them. At any turn of events, she would write up the employee for insubordination or remind the employee that they could be fired. There was no policy as to how insubordination was defined or what it referred to, so it was very easy for her to use this moniker for anything she didn't like. Employees were written up for insubordination for coming in late or for sitting in another's chair. There were no procedures for how work was to be carried out, so processes changed daily depending on her perception. Needless to say, morale was low. Everyone was frustrated, very little work was done. People were both scared to do work and to not do work, and the fear was very real. There were no boundaries, but there was a real threat. If this institution had had clear policy and procedure, the situation would have been better. If employees could have worked together, there would have been insulation and some stability. If the supervisor had asked herself what the real issues were, might there be a policy that could define expectations or whatever she was actually upset about, then the issues might have been able to be resolved. The whole circumstance might have been better, but in this case, people simply left as fast as they could. Now, that brings me to a word about a truly bad situation like the one I just described. There are some cases where the situation is simply toxic. Higher-level authorities do not understand the work, micromanage, create random or contradictory expectations. Those in power do not want to make change, and a sad truth is that some organizations prefer their workers to have low morale. Employees with low morale can often be bullied, overworked, underpaid, and otherwise abused. If this is your situation, you basically have only one choice, and that is to leave. Sometimes the only thing you can do is analyze the situation, recognize it's not you, and do whatever you need to get out. But hopefully, you're not in that situation, but are here today because you want to improve morale and are in a situation where that is possible, or want to assure morale is strong in your institution. If you are a supervisor or administrator, then the path can be easier. But even if you do not have that authority, if you can illustrate the problem objectively to those who can make change, that might help. And if you can model the behavior that you would like to see happen, that might help. So the bottom line is this. Low morale in the workplace comes because workers see and experience real problems that go unattended. If progress can be made to resolve the real issues, morale can be improved. Now, at this point, I would like to thank you all for your time and my support staff here for their patience and help, and ask if you have any questions.
So if you have questions for Sue, please type them into the question box. Sue, what can you do about situations where an administrator consults with employees and then seems to disregard that consultation? It can make an employees feel worse about the situation because they feel like their opinion was disregarded.
Well, I think one thing, that's a situation where solidarity helps. If you have a group of employees talking to the administrator, making the suggestions, you can have the same group of employees go to the administrator and very politely, but say, you know, we noticed that you didn't go this path. Can you explain this? Or the path that you did take doesn't address these issues. Can you explain it? And there is, in that case, safety in numbers. There is also the possibility that with a group of people going, you've got less risk, but you also might have more authority by if there's 10 of you saying, no, this doesn't work for us, this is the reason why. I think the important thing, though, in that situation is to have the reason why, not simply what you did doesn't work, but what the path that you took causes these problems. How do we deal with it?
Okay. Do you have any more advice on resistance to change?
Well, modeling is a biggie. If you model behavior, people will follow. The other thing I would suggest is explaining the change. A lot of times people don't want the change because they think we've always been doing it this way, or we've done this and it's worked, and so if it's not broken, why are we trying to fix it? And one of the things that can help with that is by explaining this is the reason why, this is the rationale, this is why we're doing it, and maybe the rationale behind it is we don't have a choice. You know, our board, our governing body says we have to do X, Y, and Z, and this is the way we can do it. But if you give people the reason, often that can make a big difference.
Okay. What if you were in a place where everything has to be a policy? Policies just grow like Topsy. Some minor little things go wrong. Oh, make a policy.
Yeah, I appreciate that can be frustrating. At the same time, in some ways, that can be reassuring. If you have the policy, then you know where the parameters are, you know where the lines are. I would rather be in a place that had too many policies than not enough policy. Um, at the same time, I suspect that if you're in a place that simply has that many policies, you are at some point going to have conflicting policies. And that is another way to sort of influence and make change. If you can bring to the governing body the issue and say, well, look, we have a policy for this, we have a policy for this, we have a policy for this, and they don't all agree, we need a general thing that we can work with, that might help.
Okay. Would it be easier to bring in an outside person to help figure out what the real problem is? Maybe someone even in another department?
Um, Well, this is not a satisfactory answer. I would say that's a definite maybe. I think it depends on the circumstances. Bringing in an outside person, if you have a group that really wants to make change, bringing in the outside person can sometimes help because they have the outsider perspective. They can have that openness to listen um, without taking it personally, being able to see the broader patterns that we talked about. However, I think a lot of times people bring in outside people, be it a different department or a consultant, because they really don't think they have a problem, and they think they know what the problem is, and it's not them, and they want the outsider to come in and say, oh, it's you bad staff people, listen to your administration, or vice versa. And then I think that really makes the situation worse. I I personally think that having the outsider come in is a secondary choice, not a primary choice, because it does usually either cause the friction, or the outside person is coming in with their own perceptions of what and how and who, and may not actually be able to see the real problem or the big picture.
Okay, do you have any tips on how to address poor morale because multiple longtime employees want more challenge, pay, promotion, but there are no openings that fit their skill sets?
Well, I think you start by acknowledging that. Um, if the employee really does have a vast skill set that they can reference, you might talk with them and say, is there something else that they can do? Can they shift? But simply saying, look, I know you are great with tech, but we don't have that at this point. We simply can't do that. And talking with them, is there something in in their position, in what they're doing, that they could do that would make their work life a little more interesting? And it sounds like what the employee's morale problem is that they're bored. They're bored. They're not getting satisfaction with what they're doing. They're not getting money, so which might offset some of that. But to be very straightforward, we don't have a budget, but what can we do to make this not boring, to make this more interesting for you? It could be that the situation is such because of circumstance and through no fault of the library. There isn't a budget. They're being cut. Staff is cut. Budgets cut. Hours cut. And that the reality is there really isn't much that can be done. And in that case, maybe what you can do is talk about are there other opportunities elsewhere? Could the job be shifted so that it's part-time and the person could go work part-time somewhere else and be happier? Maybe it's that you say, I can't really help you at all, but I can give you a good recommendation. If you want to hunt something else out, I understand. It depends kind of on the specifics.
Okay. How can an administrator who wants to make improvements work with staff who don't believe they need to improve?
Well, as the administrator, you've got things in mind that you are viewing as improvement. I would say figure out the explanation behind that. Why are these improvements? What will they net? And be able to explain why you want to do things in this new way. I would then suggest that it be not only explained to staff, but suggested as a trial. You know, maybe this won't work, we don't know, but let's try it and see. But then you also have to have the follow-through to do the trial, to somehow decide how you're going to measure the results, and be prepared that maybe it doesn't work, in which case you say to the staff, yep, you were right, it wasn't really an improvement, so we'll go back to the old way. Or, see guys, it really did work out better, this is how we know, this is why it's improved, so let's try this new thing next.
Okay. How do you feel about suggestions to make things fun occasionally and celebrate small accomplishments? Does this really improve morale?
I think it can. I think if you have an okay morale situation, or a situation where the problems of morale are external to the building or to things that you can control. As an example, right at the moment I'm in a situation where we are in a tiny space. We desperately need more space. We went to a referendum twice and got shot down for renovation, and we are now going on phase 3. We're going to add space, but we know at the onset that it's not going to be enough space. So we're going to pack everything in our library, move to a cramped quarters for a year, and know that when we come back, what we're coming into is probably not going to be worth it. That's a very demoralizing situation. As a staff, we like our jobs, we like each other, but the situation is hard. And in that case, or in our case, yes, the frosting has helped, the chocolate has helped. The situation of being able to have a shared time where we all sit around, we eat pizza and go, yes, this just is frustrating, this is going to be bad, but we'll get there, and we'll just eat pizza in the meanwhile. So it can help if the problems are deep, and are things that are perceived as being able to be changed or controlled. It's not going to help. So it depends on the kind of source, the source of the problem. If the problems are truly within the institution of processes not working or things not being functional, then no amount of frosting is going to help.
Okay, I think we have probably time for one more question. What's the best way to handle staff who want the constant pat on the back for a good job?
I think I would suggest to handle that very directly and say, look, this is your job. When you're doing a good job, you're not going to get constant reward. It's just being straightforward and saying, this is the process. This is how we will do our rewards, our acknowledgement. I think in that kind of situation is when the what I kind of think of as silly, but the employee of the month or the once a month event actually does work. So you can structure it, and it's not a continual yay, but you have some kind of structured program that people can focus on and work towards. And there are some groups, some age brackets, some populations that does work for and enjoy it, and others that it doesn't. So I think what you have there is not really necessarily a morale problem, but something that kind of structured attaboy can work for.
Okay, I think that's about all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Sue, for your tips on how to recognize and improve low morale in the workplace. Thank you to all of our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the Elect CE committee plan new continuing education offerings. Information about all Elect's webinars can be found on the Elect's homepage. Please check out our web courses, for which we have multiple sessions scheduled throughout the 2015 calendar year. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing educational opportunities are welcome at any time. Please contact any member of the Elect CE committee or submit a proposal for a webinar using the online form on the Elect's webpage under Online Learning. I would like to thank Emily Whitmore in the Elect's office and Wanda Jazieri for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support they and their colleagues on the Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other Elect's continuing education offerings again in the future.